Well, time now to change the pace. Let's get you some business news. France 24's Catherine Bennett is here with us. Catherine, first of all, there's an economic rebound in the Eurozone in the third quarter of this year. What does that mean in terms of recovery?
Well, although this is an incredibly impressive expansion, it's the fastest rate of expansion since records began in 1995. But actually that record is almost meaningless because of the current context. The Eurozone saw a jump in GDP of 12.7% in the July-September period. And that's compared with the previous 3 months. But GDP was still 4.3% smaller than it was before the pandemic. So we haven't yet recouped the loss in output caused by the coronavirus. These numbers, of course, refer to the summer, when many restrictions had been relaxed and consumers were travelling and spending money. But this fresh wave of restrictions across the Eurozone could pull the region back into contraction in the final quarter of the year. We saw similar record numbers in the US this week, but these jumps are more an indication of just how deep the economy fell this year than an indication of strong and permanent recovery. Well, as two of Europe's biggest economies go back into lockdown, they've unleashed a raft of emergency support measures for businesses. France's GDP, already set to contract by 10% due to severe restrictions in the spring, is now expected to contract by 11%. And Germany warned that it doesn't expect its economy to return to pre-pandemic levels until 2022. Camille Nedelec has the story.
The party's over at this bar in Berlin as a 4-week partial lockdown will get underway on Monday. The government has pledged to support businesses with a raft of measures worth some 10 billion euros. But the manager is sceptical.
Die Hilfen und die Überbrückungshilfen, die es bis jetzt gab, haben nicht für alle Gastronomien, haben nicht für alle Clubs, haben nicht für viele Branchen einfach nicht gewirkt.
Berlin says companies could be given up to 2/3 of their November 2019 earnings, and loans will be available to freelancers and small companies. Many businesses in France will also have to close as new restrictions came into force on Friday. Paris has made 15 billion euros worth of support available per month of lockdown, including 7 billion euros for a furlough scheme, paying employees unable to work 84% of their salary. 6 billion euros to support small and medium-sized businesses who've lost large chunks of revenue due to lockdown. 1 billion to pay employer social security charges, and around another 1 billion to help businesses pay their rent. Restaurants are hoping to apply lessons learnt in the first lockdown.
Adapter ce qu'on a fait avant, de créer, de faire à emporter, de faire nos mieux pour pouvoir vivre.
The restrictions come in the run-up to the festive period when shoppers would be buying presents and when many shops make the bulk of their annual sales.
Now let's take a look at global markets. European indices mostly lower at the close on Friday, following losses on Wall Street overnight. The FTSE was down just under the flat line, the DAX also dipping 0.33%, and the CAC 40 up 0.5%. Wall Street, meanwhile, is wrapping up its worst week since March this year. Stocks plunged in earlier trading, led by tech shares on the Nasdaq, which is now down 2.5%. Investors are likely also spooked by record coronavirus cases in the US, and just days to go until the US presidential election. The Dow Jones dropped 0.5%, and the S&P 500 dipped 1.1%. Now for some of today's top business headlines. New travel restrictions and lockdowns in Europe are weighing on airlines. Air France KLM said on Friday that it will reduce planned flights for the rest of the year and warned investors that its earnings would fall even further. Shares in the airline are down more than 70% this year because of the crisis. Huawei has been knocked from the top spot as the world's biggest smartphone maker, after only being crowned with that title in the second quarter of the year. Samsung has overtaken it with 80.2 million shipments, against Huawei's 50.9 in the third quarter. The UK's data privacy watchdog has fined the Marriott Hotels chain £18.4 million, that's 20.4 million euros, for a data breach back in 2014. That cyber attack was only discovered 4 years later and put the personal information of around 339 million guests globally at risk. Well, it's day one of a second lockdown here in France, and French bookshops are asking the government to be considered essential services. It feels even more urgent now with the Christmas shopping season fast approaching and the online retail giant Amazon eating up more and more of the market share in the country. Karis Garland has more on this.
This Parisian bookstore isn't considered an essential business, but its door is still open. The shop has put in place a click and collect system, hoping to survive France's second lockdown.
On a beaucoup de commandes, on a beaucoup de gens qui hier nous demandaient est-ce que vous allez faire le click and collect, est-ce qu'on pourra venir chercher des livres. Manifestement, l'offre culturelle, c'est quelque chose qui est très important. Donc tant mieux pour nous et puis à nous ensuite d'honorer ça.
Bookshop owners say the number of customers continued to increase after France came out of its first lockdown in May. It's a promising trend, but online retailers like Amazon continue to pose a threat. The company is leading e-commerce in France. The president of the Traders Confederation of France has urged people to wait to see if independent stores will be allowed to open before making purchases.
J'ai demandé au ministre de nous aider à demander aux Français d'attendre la réouverture des magasins indépendants, des magasins tout court dans les centres-villes, et de ne pas aller directement chez Amazon dans les grandes surfaces.
Amazon's net income for the third quarter tripled from the same time last year, with the pandemic encouraging customers to spend big online. It made $6.3 billion between July and September. That's more than $2.8 million per hour.
The timing could not be worse. Berlin's Brandenburg Airport will finally open tomorrow, and perhaps the date is appropriate because it's a bit of a Halloween nightmare. It's opening almost a decade behind schedule and has gone more than 3 times over budget. But that's not even the biggest problem. It's opening in the middle of a pandemic when global tourism and aviation industries are in crisis. This airport is going to have to ask for more funding to get it through the rest of the year, even though a third of its financing has already come from German taxpayers' pockets. And it's starting off with huge debts to repay, and that's before even one passenger has stepped foot in the terminal. That wraps up the business from me.
OK, on that note, with this airport, that's pretty bad timing all round, to be fair.
Extremely bad timing.
Catherine, thanks very much for our roundup of the business.